Welcome to NAFI's More Right Rudder podcast. I'm Beth Stanton, Director of Publications and Editor for NAFI. This is The Writers Behind the Stories, a bi-monthly series on the podcast where we meet some of the authors who write the articles in NAFI's Mentor Magazine. Today's guest is Fred Stahl, Ph.D. Fred has been a flight instructor since 1992 with more than 3,500 hours of dual given. He is the former chief flight instructor at AOPA, where he managed in-house flight training and pilot proficiency programs. Fred works with both brand new students and already certificated pilots to help them achieve their goals. He has also taught aviation ground school courses in various settings. Fred is a recognized instrument instructor and past contributor to IFR Magazine. He has been a NAFI member for about 30 years, and in 2020 wrote his first article for Mentor Magazine, and he's been an active contributor since. Fred recently wrote, "There wouldn't be a Mentor Magazine without the balance between how-to technical articles and human interest stories. In my humble opinion, the combination of both elements is what working as a flight instructor is all about." Fred, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Beth. Happy to be here.
So glad you're here. So just so our listeners know, we pregame our conversations a little bit ahead of time, and I purposely did not ask Fred some questions that I'm really curious about because I think it's kind of nice to kind of get the reaction in real time. So Fred, what is your PhD in?
Psychology.
Interesting. I was like, okay, it's going to be either like aeronautical, like engineering, or basket weaving. Okay, psychology.
So this is closer to basket weaving. Yeah.
Listen, I was a psych major for my undergraduate. So yeah.
Good for you. Yeah.
Well, actually, this is really fascinating because with that information, see you guys, it's like, this is real time. This is real stuff here. This informs some of the content that you've written for Mentor. It does have a very kind of human factors approach. So how do you go from PhD in psychology to renowned flight instructor?
My psychology work was not in the clinical realm at all. It was more kind of academic and research. And you kind of hit a little bit of the nail on the head a bit ago when you said human factors. So I was in a field that is referred to as environmental psychology, which is a kind of a crossfit which involves human factors work as well as social psychology and so forth. So I think my interest earlier in life included teaching, and I have a little bit of university teaching background way back. And I think when I became a pilot a little bit later on and got into a flying club, and the need arose in that flying club for a flight instructor, something clicked. And I said, much as at that particular stage, I kind of had the idea that flight instructor, man, I'm like, that's one notch below God, and I'm not there. So,
as most flight instructors, I'm sure, would concur with you on that point.
Absolutely. So, I don't know. But giving it some thought for a day or so, I said, I bet you I could give that a shot. And so, I think it's not so much a leap from psychology to flight instructing, but the two are steps in a journey. How's that?
I love that. So one of the steps in your journey, in my opinion, is pretty darn impressive. How does one become chief flight instructor for AOPA?
Well, so you'll be very impressed by this one. So a while back, I retired from my non-aviation day job career in the IT industry, and uh, made the kind of geographic move from North Carolina, where I was living at that time, up here to Frederick, Maryland. And that was a move based on family considerations. Had a new granddaughter. We wanted to be closer to family and all that great stuff. And so I figured, gee, if I'm going to be in Frederick, Maryland, which is where AOPA is headquartered, it would be kind of a shame if I didn't at least try to get some kind of work over there. And I had always, had a kind of an eye on their pilot information center. And, from time to time, as a flight instructor and as a pilot, I would call those guys with a question of one kind or another, and they were usually quite helpful. I'm sure quite a number of NAFI members know exactly what I'm talking about. And so I figured, what a great gig for an old retired guy, a pilot, to go work in the pilot information center and sit on the phone all day talking to pilots. I mean, it's like dying and going to heaven, right? Before I knew it, I had a couple of job offers over there. One of which was for the chief flight instructor in the flight operations department, which was actually a kind of not exactly a newly created position. I think it was a resurrection of a position that maybe once upon a time had kind of fallen between the cracks. And I said, "Yep, I can. Long story short, let's do this." And so, I mean, I went from just being retired and waking up late in the morning to thinking I was going to be sitting on the phone talking to pilots all day long, to actually going over there and flying and teaching people how to fly.
Well, they just don't, I'm sure they don't hire just any chuckleheads over there at AOPA. So, well, it sounds like over the course of your career, you've had lots of different experiences as a flight instructor. So your stint at AOPA, after you retired, you taught ground courses, which I would actually like to talk to you about, because I think this is element of flight instruction that doesn't really get a lot of highlight. And one of the articles that you wrote, which was in the July-August issue of 2023, was From the Ground Up, Putting Your Ground Instructor Certificate to Work. Right. So in that story, you shared with NAFI members how when you first became a CFI, you're like, hey, let me put this to use. Let me get some experience. And you came up against some walls as you attempted to do this. So tell us a little bit about, why did you do the ground instructor, and why do you think other people could potentially teach ground school courses?
Sure. So, well, first of all, having an interest in doing ground school stems probably from just a deeper interest in teaching. Okay, and so I guess I had a little bit of background walking in through that door as from a teaching perspective, and so it's not to say that, gee, I woke up one morning and let's teach ground school. So, but having already been a pilot at that point in my life, maybe for 4 or 5 years, whatever that number was, and knowing at that point that I think I was probably going to be moving toward the direction of becoming a flight instructor, and talking to other flight instructors and kind of figuring out how the whole process works and so on and so forth, I got different views on the whole question of ground instructing. These kind of range from between, well, ground school is very important, and usually CFIs are quite natural fit for teaching ground school. They obviously have the background, they have the technical knowledge and so forth, and they're instructors already. But oftentimes it's hard to get CFIs to want to take time out of their flight training hours to devote to ground school. And so, yeah, geez, it'd be a great idea to have folks who can just kind of devote their time to teaching ground school and not worry about, well, gee, I'm missing out on flight hours. So that was one perspective. And at the other end of the spectrum was, ground school, a big deal. People take a King course or any one Sporty's course, and nobody much goes to ground school, and about the only value in it is that you'll get the fundamentals of instructing written exam out of the way, which you're going to have to take anyway when you go for your CFI. So I figured, well, what the heck? I mean, it's not a whole lot involved. Basically, after studying, there's the ground instructor exam, written exam, and the fundamentals of instructing exam. Didn't seem very, very painful, so I went out and I got it and I did it. And then I figured, well, okay, I now have the fundamentals of instructing under my belt, so what the heck? I'll just kind of sit tight until I'm ready to start working on my CFI. Then it kind of dawned on me that, well, I've got this capability. There's got to be a market out there to use it. And so after a little bit of knocking on doors and this, that, and the other thing, you kind of say, well, what about the local community college? So sure enough, they had a private pilot ground school, but they already had someone teaching it, and thanks for your interest. And so that wasn't going to work, at least not in the immediate term. And so I went knocking on some other doors, and I found out that you could probably go to your local high school, and they may have a adult education program that takes place in the evenings at the high school. And and if they do, maybe you can get on you can propose a course and get in their course catalog. And if you get more than X number of people signing up, you've got a ground school. You've got a course. And so we gave that a try, and actually that worked. And so I managed to do a couple semesters worth of that type of thing. And the benefit I hope there was a benefit to the students who attended. The benefit for me certainly was, as it is with teaching and instructing always, you learn so much through teaching. Learn from your students. You learn just from preparation for each lesson, and so on and so forth. And that was, for me at least anyway, was a fabulous experience. And in the many years since, wherever I taught flying, and I lived in different parts of the country, and taught flying, and pretty much wherever I lived. I always found a time, and I always found a mechanism through which to also teach ground school. Oftentimes at the very same FBO where we're teaching flying, that was the most obvious place, and the owners were always happy to create. They're always happy about ground schools because it created an opportunity to bring people in the door, some number of whom would sign up for flight training. And so, it generally worked out well, and mostly private ground school, but a lot of instrument ground school as well. I had a stint back in the middle 1990s where I taught part-time for a small branch office, so to speak, of American Flyers, which is a kind of a large operation that has schools in many different cities. And they, for a period of several years, had a school outside of Detroit, Michigan, the area where I was living at that time. And they do ground schools. They do very rigorous ground schools kind of every weekend, these kind of test prep ground schools. So, like maybe it was the first weekend of the month was always private ground school. And then the next weekend was instrument ground school. And the next weekend after that was commercial ground school. But the fourth weekend of the month was the flight instructor revalidation course, their FERC. And they had me teach that. And that was a real experience and a half. And so I enjoyed it immensely, but it was grueling. It was another step in the journey, another part of the growth process.
Well, and that's the truth for any endeavor that we undertake in aviation. And I have a little bit of a ground school confession to make to you and to all the NAFI members listening. So I took ground school from the adult continuing education through the community college. And I signed up for the King's ground school course and the Sporties ground school course. And then I took another in-person ground school course. So I know that may seem like a bit of a slow learner, but I just want to share this with you. I live in the Central Valley of California. I started flying on December 1st. If you know anything about the Central Valley of California, all through the winter, there's this thing called Thule fog. So flight after flight after flight, I got canceled and I wanted to just start flying and keep flying, but you can't fly with, quarter mile of visibility. So what I did is I said, all right, enough of this. I'm going to just take ground school and pass my written. So I literally took this ground school. I knew nothing about aviation. I knew nothing about flying. I literally memorized everything with zero flight experience context to put it into. Memorized it, passed my written with flying colors, and then I started flying June 1st, literally 6 months later. Mm-hmm. And as I'm flying, I'm like, oh, that's what that meant. And so it was so interesting to take ground school with zero context. Yeah. So I don't necessarily recommend doing it that way, but there was repetition. So then there were things I didn't understand, like navigation. I had a hard time with that. Mm-hmm. And there were some other things I had a really hard time with. So I would watch the King's School videos, then I'd watch the Sporties videos, and then I'd look at YouTube videos. Weather was the other hard thing I had. So then about a year went by and I'm getting ready to take my check ride. And that's when I took ground school again, literally in person again, because I figured it would be like a review. Sure. So it was like your fourth time was a charm, right? So it really got hammered home. So I tell all this to let you guys know that I'm sure people listening, if you've ever thought you weren't the brightest bulb in the marquee, I'm just saying, there might be one that's a little dimmer, but, I'm not ashamed of it. It's just, I learned through repetition. So here is my question to you, Fred, and you brought this up at the beginning of you talking about the ground school instruction. People can literally read a book. They can watch videos. They don't have to take ground school in-person classes. However, for myself, as a visual learner, is a person who likes to bounce ideas back and forth and ask questions, it was very valuable for me to do this as opposed to just reading a book. Right. So tell me a little bit about those two different approaches.
Right. So there's another nail you've hit on the head for us. So the reality isn't whether it's flying or pretty much any other endeavor. Different people learn in different ways. There are many different learning styles, if you will. And there are visual learners and there are book learners, so to speak. And there are people who if they can't touch it and feel it and turn it and twist it, they're not going to learn. And so the challenge, in a sense, the challenge is to the challenge for any individual is to find the learning mechanism or mechanisms that work best for you. And that, that you may not hit that one on the first try, right? So it may take, ground school may or may not turn out to be your thing. But video course might be, or vice versa, or maybe, right, in perhaps in your case being a great example, a combination of all of the above. I have done ground schools where it just people enroll and they come, and you don't necessarily know who's going to end up flying eventually, and eventually could be in another month or 3 months or 2 years. And if it's once it gets beyond a certain period of time away from ground school, it's nice that they came to ground school and participated, but what have they really retained from it, and so on and so forth. And I've taught in those environments where okay, we're at the flight school at the airport. We're flying with folks during the day, as it were, and we are and maybe they're participating in ground school in the evening, and the ground school more or less meshes with their flight training in terms of the sequence of lessons and so forth. In which case, my thought has always been that kind of integrated ground and flight training is better for most folks. Okay. On the other hand, there's a tradition, and I'm sure we still see it out there, particularly among perhaps the older set of independent flight instructors who, when approached by a new student, maybe the first question the flight instructor asks, have you passed your knowledge test yet? And the answer might be, what's a knowledge test, right? And so, there are instructors out there who perhaps who still don't want to start flying with you until you've presented a certificate of completion of your knowledge test. And that was never my style. That's not my thing. If on those occasions when I've worked as an independent and I've taken on a new student, and I've encouraged them perhaps to do a Sporties course or a King course or whatever worked for them, and I would encourage them to do that. But at the same time, we would make sure to meet on those days where we're weathered out to do ground school, and ground school that is focused obviously on the particular flight lessons that we're working on, but the more general topics as well. So whether it's weather or aerodynamics or aircraft systems and so forth, just so that I always wanted to have sort of my hands in their knowledge acquisition as well as their skill acquisition, to the extent that we were able to do that. And
that makes a lot of sense, and that's like being a well-rounded instructor, right? You want to have all the different pieces meshed together, because flying is more than just knowing things, and it's more than just the kinesthetic skill of flying. You have to integrate those things together. Absolutely.
It turns out to all be very complex, and sometimes I look back on myself and I say, "Wait, you actually did all that stuff? Nobody can do that stuff." But
wow. It is kind of amazing when you look back and you think of just how complicated this endeavor is, and it's constantly changing. And then of course, staying proficient. You could learn something 10 or 20 years ago, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it today. And so that's part of what's so important about organizations like NAFI and
Absolutely.
continuing the knowledge, staying abreast of the latest developments, as well as keeping your skills polished. And so obviously one of, the I have my finger in the pie of publications and publishing articles to help instructors learn and continue to learn and learn from each other. So Fred, when we spoke a few weeks ago, you told me that, I believe you said you've been a member of NAFI for about 30 years. And I believe you said you joined as soon as you passed your flight instructor check ride, you went and joined NAFI.
Exactly.
So you joined NAFI quite a while ago. And your first article that you wrote for Mentor Magazine was in 2020. So my question to you is, what was your impetus to decide to want to start contributing to Mentor Magazine?
Right. So yeah, that was a little bit of a time gap there, granted.
No judgment, Fred. I'm not saying you should have ponied up sooner. I'm curious because
I could say stuff like, well, I could say things like, oh, I was real busy, and with so in my case, right? So I felt I came to a certain point in life, a certain stage, a certain age, where it was a time for me to make sure that I was still doing what I could to give back and to impart whatever pearls of wisdom or experience, really, to the new people coming up, to a new generation. As cliche-ish as I'm sure that probably sounds to a lot of people. And I thought that, well, I knew that NAFI and Mentor specifically, was the right mechanism to do that. I mean, what were my options? Yeah, I could do a memoir. In fact, we could almost kind of test out a kind of maybe a title here. I was thinking maybe CFI Confidential, right? Subtitle, stories ripped from the pages of a flight instructor's logbook, something like that.
I want to see this book, by the way.
Yeah. So, but in the real world, writing for Mentor seemed to be probably a real, primary way to to get some thoughts and experiences out to folks who could maybe benefit from that sort of thing. And I'm not sure style is the right terminology here, but my general approach is to try to write stories that are from my own experience, actually sort of torn from the pages of my logbook, as it were, but do it in a way that poses the question. Put yourself in my shoes. How would you have responded? What would you have done? You might not have. It might not have worked out, or you might not have responded the way I did, and that's okay. I mean, I managed to live to talk about it, so to speak, and you will too. But I think there's a lot of learning and growth and development that goes on by trying to look at another person's experiences and try to kind of walk in their shoes a little bit and try to figure out how you might have reacted in a similar situation.
Well, I love this. This is a perfect segue, Fred. So what I'm hearing, first of all, it's not just to tell somebody something. You want people to think for themselves, like what would I have done, or present a scenario or a situation or circumstance that maybe they've never had before. Like, hadn't thought of that one, but this is what Fred did. So One of the things that you said recently, Fred, was I'm going to read it because you wrote this actually to me. And you said to me, the techniques and technicalities type of articles are essential. But at this point in my life, it's the personal stories told by fellow flight instructors that deliver the most impact for me. So tell us a little bit about what is the impact of these personal stories? What do they have on you?
Uh, Stories of others.
Yeah, you were talking about a few stories, and in particular, one was a story that Julia Harrington wrote about becoming a student again, and Patrick Howell wrote about helping one of his students in the B-52, and the instrument approach, like how music is like flight training. So you were saying that you found those were more sort of personal interest stories. They weren't like a this is how you do blank, but it was you called their stories fascinating. You just thought it was interesting. So what is it about hearing these personal interest stories that is impactful for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think they created for me an almost personal connection
Mm.
with the authors, and I could almost visualize myself in a very similar situation, similar scenario, uh, and it they're just very absorbing in that way.
Well, it's just again, not that we have any Pulitzer prizes, being thrown around over here at NAFI, but you know, people have really compelling stories to tell. And, flight instruction and flight instructors is such a niche, small community that I really do think that sharing personal experiences, and not just my student did this or I had this situation, but just like um the impact that it has being a pilot, being an aviator, being a flight instructor. People wear that not just as a job, but it's an identity. And it's an identity that not a lot of other people share. It's a small group of folks.
Right.
And so it's almost like we're like a support group for each other, really.
No, no,
And
that's very well put.
mm,
Mhm.
yeah. So with that being said, Fred, for some of our listeners who are out there who've been NAFI members for a while, who've been reading Mentor Magazine for a while, been reading your articles, been reading some of the other articles we're talking about, and they might be thinking, I might want to share one of my stories. What would your advice be to that individual?
I would encourage them that, no story, almost no story is too trivial. That probably uh, all of their experiences and stories um, can have meaning to maybe not every other reader, every other flight instructor, every other NAFI member, but even some of them, in such a way as to almost change their life or change their approach to something, or um, you know take that next step. Maybe try to do ground school. Maybe try to do aerobatics. Maybe try to stretch yourself.
Mm.
And so, if I've been able to help anyone in some way, I think that'd be great. And I would encourage any other prospective writer that they have within them. Okay, so they have the capability and should take the opportunity to share their experiences and their knowledge and their wisdom even with other people who uh, with the community amongst which will definitely be some people who will grow from wearing their shoes for an hour and from their experiences.
Well said, Fred. I think I need to take you on the road and be my, no, that's, and I'll just add another piece to this puzzle. As you well know, when prospective mentor authors reach out to me, one of the first things I do is say, let's get on the phone and talk. What do you want to write about? Let's sort of dial in an angle that you want to talk about. Some people submit things just because they have it on their mind, but other time we kind of gameplay out ideas. And so there's support here. It's not just like write this thing and you're writing it into this vacuum. Like, I work with the authors, people who say I'm not a good writer. Well, you can tell a story. We're all good at hanger flying, and writing is just another version of hanger flying. And, don't worry about not being a good writer, because that is why God invented editors. We polish it up.
I love it.
So Fred, I want to just thank you for your contributions to Mentor Magazine. I think, somebody like you who has, decades of experience under their belt, I will say, to the point what you were just saying about learning something new, a NAFI member wrote an article a couple months ago about a new way of teaching night flying. And an instructor who's been teaching this for a decade was like, wow, I never thought of teaching it that way. I'm going to teach it this way from now on. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, no matter how long we've been doing this for, we can all learn something. And then this gentleman, John Booz, who wrote this article, I don't know, he's just been teaching it this way. And he thought, oh, let me share it with NAFI. And everybody's like, oh my God, this is great. Yeah. So, the fact that he thought to reach out and take the time and effort to write this article is really impactful. And again, it doesn't have to be a how-to. It can be telling your story. That's very inspiring. And like you said, feel a connection, like that person. You walk for a few minutes in their shoes while you're reading the story. So thank you, Fred, for being part of the NAFI Mentor contributor family. Very much appreciated. Before we wrap up today, is there anything? Tell us about what's been the most rewarding part of writing for Mentor and being part of this process, not just an observer reading the magazine, but being part of it.
Wow. Seeing my articles in print, I suppose, is not too bad. I mean, I've done a little bit of that before years ago with IFR magazine, so I understand how that can really kind of impact you as well. But working with you has definitely been an experience for me as well. Writing I've done in the past, whether it was for IFR, where I wrote for over the course of a number of years, a few of their editors, and years and years of technical writing I had done in a different field. It's unusual to have, at least in my experience, it was unusual to have the kind of a relationship with an editor, that we've had. Even it's just been a couple of stories at this point, but I've learned from the process, but again, I think the most even more rewarding has been just the idea of being able to kind of get my thoughts and stories out to a community that I have a huge respect for, that I feel blessed to be able to even be a part of, let alone for so many years, and that I can through Mentor a magazine, I can have an opportunity to get out before them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Fred. It's, I like that saying, a rising tide lifts all ships, and we all can help each other, and it's a win-win.
Yeah.
And yeah, but in seeing your words in print never gets old either.
It's fun.
When you go
It's
from
fun.
like a Word document to a whole entire magazine layout, it's a lot of fun. So
It is.
yeah. So, and beside, of course, that ego gratification, like to your point, is it's just all of the fact that you are giving back. And you said that earlier in the beginning of this conversation when I asked you, why did you decide to start writing? You said it was a way that I can give back to the community. Yeah. So thank you, Fred, for giving back to the community. And I encourage all of our listeners to consider ways that you might want to consider sharing some of your stories with NAFI through Mentor Magazine.
And I look forward to reading them.
Thank you so much, Fred.
Thank you, Beth.
So everybody, thank you for joining us for the Writers Behind the Stories on NAFI's More Right Rudder podcast. Be sure to leave your comments, like, subscribe, and join me next time in a couple of months. We'll see you next time on the Writers Behind the Stories on NAFI's More Right Rudder podcast.